Well, back when I was in college in the early 80s, religious expression wasn't unusual on campus in those days. The Hare Krishnas, they would drum and chant every Friday on the quad. There was a Muslim society and a Jewish fellowship on campus, as well as a Buddhist meditation group and an organized transcendental meditation group on campus. The Christians had their own campus fellowships. The Roman Catholics, Episcopalians, Lutherans, Methodists, and the Church of Christ all had campus ministries, as did a number of evangelical parachurch groups, including Campus Crusade for Christ, InterVarsity, and Campus Ambassadors, just to name a few. There were many expressions of religious fervor on campus back then, which I came to appreciate as I went along in my educational journey, especially after eventually leaving the evangelical fold, which I was a part of, which you already know because I've told you that. For my first 3 years of college, I was part of both Campus Crusade for Christ, known today as CRU, and InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. If you don't know what these are, you can look them up. They still exist to this day. Needless to say, because of my conservative religious convictions back then, I was not among the party crowd at what was and continues to be known as a party school, right? I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder. My wife, sitting back there, often told me that it's a good thing we didn't meet in college because we never would have gotten together. Anyway, people were generally nice to me when I would come up and engage them about questions of faith. Called it witnessing back in those days. But more often than not, I would hear something like this: I don't want your religion, all those rules. Who needs them? I'm here at college and I'm free to do what I want to do for the first time in my life. I would hear that all the time. Stay away from me with your religion and its rules. I'm free, and I want to be free. It frustrated me to hear that, but it's true, isn't it? That the religion most of us learned was pretty rules-bound and legalistic, including the evangelical community that I was a part of for those 2 or 3 years in college that didn't allow for drinking alcohol or even going to the movies. I used to think often about the disconnect between the constant pressure I felt to conform to a certain ideal of Christian perfection on the one hand, and the freedom that Paul spoke about so eloquently in this text from Galatians on the other hand. For freedom, Christ has set us free, Paul wrote. Freedom is a word that we throw around a lot these days, it seems to me. But what does it mean, particularly in this context? Most everybody I went to college with wanted to be rich. I was a business student, a marketing major, actually. And I remember at graduation how smug the business students were as they chanted in unison, "We've got jobs! We've got jobs!" while looking over at the liberal arts students. It was an awful display of arrogance, especially given the fact that the liberal arts students no doubt got a better education than we did. It's funny, in a sad way, how people believe that money will bring a kind of freedom, which is one reason why most of us value it so much, I would guess. But studies have clearly shown that the more money people have, the more burden they seem to feel. Whether those burdens are real or imagined. Is this freedom? I believe my battery now, so I'll speak up a little bit. This idea of freedom often comes up in our political discussions. What does it really mean to live in a free society? If we were all free to live without constraints, we would have anarchy, I think. Someone might want to challenge me these past couple of years. I should be free to make my own decision on whether to mask or be vaccinated, has been the mantra from a sizable percentage of the population. And yet the evidence has been clear. Masking and vaccination has saved lives. But there is a question that remains. How does the exercise of my own freedom impact the freedom of others? See, this question was at the heart of our debate over masking and vaccination, and it is again on clear display this evening as our country debates the Supreme Court decision to reverse Roe v. Wade. The question of freedom is at the heart of this debate. Our bishops weighed in on this decision yesterday afternoon, and I would urge us all to go to the diocesan website and read their letter, and the presiding bishop's letter, which is linked to theirs. And also, we will find there the history of the issue of abortion rights within the modern Episcopal Church. I think it's important for us to be informed where our church has stood and continues to stand on this important issue, and how we got to this decision. The question that always comes up in the church is one I have heard many times, namely, what must I do to be a good Christian? Or, to put it collectively, what must we do as a parish to fulfill our Christian role in the community at large? But if we have real freedom, why would we need to do anything? Is it grace enough? Do we have to be encumbered by some ideal to be a Christian or a Christian community? That's an interesting question, I think. It's worth pondering. Yet, Paul suggested that freedom does, in fact, lead to being encumbered. He believed that those who are free should make themselves slaves to one another. Those are his words. And live a certain way. And at the end of this text, he listed some imperatives that look a lot like rules to me. So apparently, in Paul's view, Christian freedom does not look anything like living an unencumbered life. Reverend Dr. J. William Harkins, who's a senior lecturer at Columbia Theological Seminary and canon associate at the Cathedral of St. Philip in Atlanta. He wrote this about our text this evening. Bondage takes many forms, he writes, and we must be courageous in naming them. Moreover, freedom from bondage requires the wisdom and courage to ask what in context we understand our freedom, and to what end that freedom shall be used. In other words, freedom from constraints of bondage must be freedom for a particular purpose. Something we might want to think about. He goes on to write, in these verses from Galatians, Paul is saying unequivocally that freedom is for love. You see, as I mentioned last week, the church in Galatia was engaged in an epic theological battle at the time Paul wrote this letter, somewhere between 50 and 60 AD. You see, there were young believers in Galatia who understood that in order to be a true follower of Jesus, one had to be circumcised first. Paul believed that these young believers were wrong because it meant that the Gentiles he was proclaiming the gospel to would be excluded from the community. These young believers, called Judaizers, were in desperate fear that Gentile followers of Jesus would live their religious lives outside of the Jewish context in which it in the very context designed to be life-giving for them and others. In other words, the Christians, the Judaizers in Galatia, were allowing debates over circumcision to be given precedence over the rule of loving one's neighbor as oneself. So how often do we do this, whether in church or in the wider culture, in the world? You name the issue. How often do we put issues over people? For freedom Christ has set us free, Paul wrote. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. For you are called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love, become slaves to one another. For the whole law is summed up in a single commandment: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's what he wrote. Paul was exhorting young believers in Galatia, and us by extension, not to be encumbered by anything except Christ. Now, I don't know about you, but I put a lot of encumbrances on myself. And if we just list them out, write them down, maybe, and recognize them for what they are, we might be ready and able to let them go, let them melt away. Because they are quite often without merit, these encumbrances. Paul is exhorting us not to be encumbered by anything except Christ. And this includes our political ideologies. And what does Jesus require? Simply to be bound to and love our neighbors. That is the only encumbrance. You see, our freedom in Christ is not evidenced by results, but by our character. It is shown not by what we do, but by the fruit that we bear in our lives, namely love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. We recognize these as the fruits of the Spirit. That's what Paul listed in his letter. And so, to those who so nicely rejected my invitation to follow Jesus all those years ago, over 40 years ago now, hopefully they have come to understand with time and wisdom that we are all encumbered. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, because we are bound to one another, no matter our differing persuasions. We can either recognize this and live for an orientation of love and form our character around the fruits of the Spirit, or we can live imprisoned by the notion that how we live our lives is of no consequence to our neighbor, our community, or our world. There is a clear choice there, it seems to me.